Hello and welcome everyone to Bridging Voices podcast series hosted by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Europe. I am Farwa Aamer. I'm a research analyst with the Energy, Water and Sustainability program at the Stimson Center. And today we'll be talking about global response to climate risk mitigation, a spotlight on Pakistan floods. And we have with us our esteemed guest, Ambassador Asad Majeed Khan, Pakistani ambassador to the EU, Belgium and Luxembourg. And Ambassador, I can say this, that we go way back because prior to our assignment here in the EU area, you were the ambassador to the United States, serving in Washington, D.C., and you've also been a director of the South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, SAARC. So you kind of understand regional cooperation and global cooperation like upfront. So I'm going to just deep dive into the conversation that we are going to have today. Devastating floods, firstly, commiserations and all our thoughts and prayers with the people of Pakistan as they go through some of the most difficult times that they've seen in the past few decades. We have had a good sense of the devastation that has been caused by the flash flooding that's happened in Pakistan, the monsoon rainfalls, unprecedented in so many ways, over 33 million people impacted, 1/3 of the country submerged underwater, and the scale is apparent, and media has done a great job in kind of like bringing the visuals from the field to the international community. But for the benefit of our listeners today, would you just walk us through the episodes that kind of like took place during the monsoon season in Pakistan and the aftermath of the climate disaster?
Well, first of all, Farwa, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be sitting here with you in Brussels, talking about an issue that I know you are very passionate about, and I'd like to also, through you, thank the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and this foundation, I think, has done a lot of good work, and I am happy that I can also contribute by actually sharing something about the flood disaster in Pakistan, which, in the words of the UN Secretary General, happened because of monsoons on steroids. And he visited the places and he actually very clearly put it as something that he has never seen, a climate carnage of this size and scale he has not seen. And for someone who has served as UN High Commissioner for Refugees for a very long time and also as Secretary General, I think that's a very, very huge statement to be made. On the size and scale, just to give you a sense of how bad it is, that 1/3 of Pakistan was inundated. This year we had rains which were 8.9 times the 30-year average in the south of Pakistan, particularly in the Sindh province. In Balochistan, it was close to around 7 times the usual average rains. 13,000 kilometers of roads have been devastated. 439 bridges have been destroyed. And this is really the disaster. But the flood disaster has been unfortunately followed by a health disaster. Basically, we are also seeing a livelihood catastrophe also arising on the scene right now. Because what has happened is that our infrastructure, our agriculture, our transport has been affected in a very, very serious way. And so we are seeing both the livelihood crisis, the health crisis, the food crisis. because of the water, even under normal circumstances, we will have to face vector-borne diseases like dengue, and with so much water out there, it has actually turned into a major catastrophe and a major burden on our health infrastructure. And the fact that water destroyed a number of hospitals, a number of health facilities, it has actually added additional stress. Similarly, education. 26,000 schools have been damaged or destroyed, with about 7,000 schools that were actually not directly impacted by the floods being used for sheltering people who didn't have anywhere to go. And those schools are actually being used, which means, and there are still many areas in Pakistan where water has not been drained, which means that these schools will continue to be used for sheltering people, which would mean that the kids are not going to be able to go to schools. So they will miss at least half a year of their education. Similarly, crops, because the areas that have been hit by the floods, are areas where we produce a lot of our rice, where we produce a lot of our cotton, where we are actually also, basically dependent on those intermediate crops. And with the food inflation going around all over the world, it really poses an additional challenge for a population which was under a lot of stress because of increased food prices. So we are actually anticipating a lot more, I would say, stress on common people. And in this process, as you know well, that it is the vulnerable population. And I think what is really worse is that all of this is happening on account of climate change, and something where Pakistan actually has contributed the least. And that makes this whole disaster and its acceptance and acceptability by common people on the street as more and more difficult.
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for walking us through that and the stats that you share. Of course, no one can hide away from the fact that the kind of imprint that Pakistan has in terms of its climate, contributions to the climate change, it's minimal. But on the side of receiving end, Pakistan has received the brunt of it this year. And this is going to continue, and we're going to talk about it later in the podcast. But I just want to kind of draw your attention to something that you kind of spoke about when you mentioned UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and he visited Pakistan, and he also kind of declared that the country is on the verge of a public health crisis, given the waterborne diseases and food insecurity, rightfully that you mentioned, from the, it's an agrarian economy, the crops fields have been destroyed. There's this whole lives and livelihood crisis that Pakistan is going through. And because our topic for the day is global response, and international community definitely has been talking about it a lot, whether it's Twitter, whether it's on other mediums, there has been a lot of support coming in from presidents of different countries, heads of states. But I just want to learn from you the rehabilitation, the mitigation, and the adaptation framework from where we're looking at it. It's massive. The scale's massive. It needs an ample amount of support coming not only from national level, from the government itself, Pakistan, but also internationally. So what are some of the plans that the government will be pursuing in terms of kind of navigating the situation they're currently in? And do you think that the global response is enough?
Well, first of all, I must thank for the invaluable, important support that we have received from our friends and partners from around the world. And we have also mobilized our domestic resources, our own people, who are quite good at charity and are known for being generous, have also come forward in helping those that need that help and support. But frankly, the size and scale of what we face is absolutely beyond Pakistan to face on its own. We have actually come up with a post-disaster needs assessment. But before I speak about the post-PDNA, even before that, some of the relief and rescue activities also attracted a lot of international attention. The United Nations came up with the original flash appeal of about 166 million, which it subsequently revised to about 800 plus million. While the pledges actually for the first appeal were pretty significant, but unfortunately for the second one, so far as I understand, it is still not there. And that's really where the challenge is. You're right in saying that the media has been looking at it and has been reporting quite extensively. But then, the bandwidth when it comes to international media's attention is really very narrow. So the speed with which this crisis comes to the front is also results in an equally swift disappearance from world's attention, and that's where really our challenge is. Because I think when it comes to relief and rescue, if I were to look at the numbers, because like for instance here in Brussels, the European Union is actually one of the most significant contributors and donors, for which we are really very grateful. Around $130 million have been. Similarly, United States, China, and a number of other countries have also contributed. But it's really, I think, and for that, looking at the size and the scale, a lot is needed. And not just while the relief and rescue is continuing, I think we are now at the same time focused on our reconstruction and rehabilitation needs also. And the PDNA that the government of Pakistan and the planning ministry has issued actually lays out the extent of damage. 2.2% of our GDP has been wiped off, with about a little over $15 billion of damages, around the same amount, about $15 billion of losses, and then another $16.23 billion required basically to rebuild and reconstruct in a climate resilient way, because we would want to basically rebuild. And bearing in mind, and then as you also rightly pointed out, that we are an agrarian society. And agriculture is actually one sector which has been affected the worst, And then agriculture is also the sector from where we draw all our cash crops, that are then used as the source of for us to earn our foreign exchange also, and they impact our ability to export also. So this sector has been hurt the most. And bearing that in mind, initially in the relief and rescue phase, the government clearly came forward with this relief package, which involved around 70 billion rupees, where every affected family was provided with about 25,000 rupees of support, which is really, I think I would still say that it is insignificant, because 2.2 million houses have been destroyed, around 1.2 million livestock was lost, and livestock was also something that the farmers use as collateral, to get. And what was worse, that because of the floods, even the seed stocks were basically swept away, So the government has now come up with probably the highest, we call it the Kisan package, and if I were to translate that into English, it is the farmers package. So this package of support for the farmers basically aims at helping them, in procuring seeds, helping them in procuring, in getting water, tube wells, in getting subsidized or rebated tractors from abroad. So in total, the government has allocated around 1,800 billion, which is about 1.8 trillion rupees of this special package to help the farmers, to help the agriculture sector, which was hit the worst. That's one part. And then the infrastructure building also. And that's where I think Pakistan would look to our friends and partners, particularly here in the European Union, where Global Gateway Initiative is an undertaking where Europe mobilizes both public and private sector financing, for infrastructure-related projects across the globe, and the initial projections are about $300 billion. And I think some of it, rightly, Pakistan deserves to get that kind of investments, because we will have to, as I said, that transport, roads, railway infrastructure, all of that, that is damaged or destroyed or impacted negatively will have to be built over the next, because our economy clearly has been pushed back by about 10 years.
Thank you for sharing that, Ambassador, and also for pointing out that one thing that we don't realize is that media has a great role to play, but the attention span or the lifespan of a news or a hashtag is very limited. It's and the next disaster hits on the next news affair makes kind of like global agenda top priority, and everyone forgets what was being discussed before, and that's something that we can't afford to do, because we're looking at an emergency, an urgency of situations as climate change is obviously exacerbating, which brings me to my next question, which is, I have this grave concern that climate change, like we talked about, it's not going anywhere. This phenomena is going to repeat itself. In another 6 months, the monsoon cycle will start developing again. And in an ideal world, Pakistan and likewise countries in the same vulnerable position will have the resources not only to mitigate, adapt, but also to work on the rehabilitation efforts, like you mentioned, the 2.2 million homes being destroyed. And there are great packages, like, of course, the government's working well towards supporting its people and its economy, but just the scale that we discuss is so vast that a lot needs to be done. So in an ideal world, there would be enough supporters, mobilization of resources that can cater to both aspects, the adaptation, rehabilitation, and the mitigation, and be ready for the next cycle so history doesn't repeat itself. But unfortunately, we are not in an ideal world right now. With foresight in mind, do you share the same concern, first of all? And given, we've talked about heads of states, we've talked about governments, and we've talked a little bit about media, I would also request you to kind of like reflect on the role of civil society organizations, of other multi-stakeholder platforms, other sort of like stakeholders that you consider are going to be important, not only to support Pakistan, but countries in similar capacities as we look into climate disasters and the future of climate mitigation and adaptation.
I think you've touched upon a number of very important issues. I think promoting awareness, overcoming skepticism are really a significant part of what we can do to deal with and combat the climate change disaster, which is frankly staring us in the face. It has happened in Pakistan, but it will certainly not stay in Pakistan.
Right.
I think it's very clear and obvious that we are all in it together. The irony of the situation is that we are in it for no fault of us. This is one disaster where we are not the ones who are responsible, for creating conditions, So first of all those that are still out there who have some, remaining skepticism on the existence or otherwise of climate change, I think I would invite them to come over to Pakistan and to see for themselves, because this year alone, in this decade, we have had 152 extreme climate events, You had floods here in Europe last year. We are having floods, and unprecedented ones, never seen before floods in Pakistan this year. You had extensive forest fires in Europe this year and the last year. We are seeing for the first time forest fires hitting our forests this year. And the pattern may actually pick up in the following years. We have seen glacial lake outbursts. We have seen cloud outbursts. We have experienced temperatures as high as 53.7 degrees Celsius. It's about, I think, around 128 degrees Fahrenheit. So, and then the shifting monsoon patterns, shifting precipitation patterns, the crops, the need to grow climate resilient crops, all of that is really impacting societies. And obviously, the poorer ones are the most vulnerable ones also. And then Pakistan already being seen actually one of the top 10 most vulnerable countries on account of climate change, despite having contributed or still contributing less than actually 1% to global greenhouse gases. So really, it's a question of solidarity. It's a question of standing with humanity, because yes, it's a question of justice also, but I think without going into the legality of responsibility, it's really also a time for everyone to come forward and to stand in solidarity with those who are suffering for no fault of theirs, and then that's where we create a community. That's where we create a well-informed community of individuals and nations, And I think that's where the civil society has a very important role to play, because right now the challenge, and I've been part of these climate change negotiations for years, I was myself a climate change negotiator. I've had the privilege of chairing the Group of 77, which is a coalition of 132 countries in the 13th COP in Bali, from where the Bali Plan of Action came out, and these 4 pillars of finance, technology, mitigation, and adaptation were basically put forward. So that's where we need to bring all the players, and even in that COP, promises were made, formalized in the Paris Agreement, of generating finance to support adaptation in countries that need that kind of financial support. We have not seen those kind of finances being contributed, So I think it's really important to basically increase climate finance, to create the mechanisms to operationalize those that are already in place. And also, I think what is very important right now, and this is something that our delegation will be working hard in coordination with other like-minded countries, is to bring the whole loss and damage debate to the forefront of climate change discourse multilaterally. Because once we are able to, because as I said in the beginning, that we are all in it together. And we know now on a daily basis that every other day, every other month, every other year, one or the other country suffers that. So we really need to come and join our heads in finding solution, and finance obviously will be, because as I said, looking at the extent of damage in Pakistan, with 2.2% of our GDP wiped away overnight, with almost $30 billion of losses and damage, that needs to be compensated, we need to be helped with, and that's where we would hope and expect that, the international community, governments have their own way, they have their own constraints in reacting. Civil society, I believe, is fair. Civil society is also, I believe, fairer. because they don't operate with those constraints. And what is good about climate change discourse is that the civil society organizations, even in these formal negotiation processes, also have a role to play. We have a robust component of our civil society represented in our delegation, which would go and attend COP27. We hope that from around the world, civil society representatives would come and sensitize the world about the challenges and how to basically meet those challenges.
Thank you, Ambassador. And as a proud member of the civil society, I mean, I appreciate the trust that governments in need, especially like that of Pakistan in these tough times, have in civil society organizations and what we can bring to the table. And this is part of the effort, right? Connecting the voice from the country and the efforts that are happening in the country that's flood-stricken to the rest of the world and through our networks to everyone who is invested in the idea of climate change and supporting. But what I heard from you throughout our conversation is strength in numbers, really, is how the global community, how different stakeholders, be it the governments, be it the CSOs, be it the think tankers, academics, they come together and they provide knowledge, they raise awareness, they provide sort of like a platform where these issues can be discussed. And so climate finance being one important issue that you kind of like pointed out, the countries like Pakistan and other countries in the global south and equally vulnerable climate positions can be boosted or kind of injected with sort of that climate finance is a top priority. But also what looking forward we need to do as a community is to continue to have more conversations to raise awareness about the different issues, because when you look at Pakistan flooding, we have a lot of water, which is detrimental, but at the same time, it's a country that is water scarce and water stress is going to rise. And in the spirit of the conference that we are hosting simultaneously in these 2 days, on international hydrodiplomacy, bringing attention to the water scarcity issues and transboundary river issues, it's important to highlight how the whole idea of climate is interconnected with water and how it's connected to the other SDGs, whether it's gender, whether it's food, whether it's the idea of providing better living standards and socioeconomic side of things. So thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us for this podcast, for sharing your valuable insights with us. And we, once again, our thoughts and prayers for the people of Pakistan. And we hope that into the next year, there is a better system so that we don't have to go through what we saw this year, the amount of devastation. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much for hosting me, for asking me to speak about this important issue, which is our number one priority in Pakistan. I really appreciate you are doing this program. Thank you.
Thank you.